Welcome to Paris. The year is 1789. You are standing in the heart of the largest city in continental Europe, a place where roughly 650,000 souls wake up every morning under the same gray sky, breathe the same thick air, and walk the same cobblestone streets that have witnessed centuries of French history. This is not just any city. This is the capital of the most powerful kingdom in Europe, the center of art, philosophy, and fashion, the place where Voltaire once walked, where Rousseau found his voice, and where the ideas that would reshape the entire Western world are now spreading like wildfire through coffee houses and secret meetings. But if you look closely, if you pay attention to the faces of the people passing by, you will notice something else beneath the elegance and the grandeur. You will notice hunger. You will notice fear. You will notice a kind of desperate tension hanging in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Because Paris, in 1789, is a city on the edge, and the edge is closer than anyone dares to admit. The winter that just ended was one of the harshest this country has seen in nearly a century. Temperatures dropped so low that the Seine River froze solid, and poor families burned their furniture just to survive the night. Crops failed across the countryside, and now, in the early months of this new year, the price of bread has reached levels that most Parisians simply cannot afford. We are talking about a basic loaf of bread consuming nearly 80% of a working family's income. 80%. That means a laborer, a man who works 12 or 14 hours a day hauling goods or building walls, has almost nothing left after feeding his family. No money for clothes, no money for medicine, no money for anything that might make life just a little bit easier. And bread is not a luxury here. Bread is survival. The average Parisian eats about 3 pounds of bread every single day. It is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is the only thing standing between life and starvation. So when the price of bread doubles, and then doubles again, people do not simply tighten their belts and move on. They panic. They grow angry. And they start looking for someone to blame. If you walk through the streets of Paris right now, in these early months of 1789, you will see a city of impossible contrasts. On one side, you have the grand boulevards and elegant townhouses of the aristocracy, places where powdered wigs and silk dresses are still the fashion, where servants in livery open doors for guests arriving in gilded carriages, and where dinner parties feature dozens of courses prepared by private chefs. These are the nobles, the ones who pay almost no taxes, who own vast estates in the countryside, and who seem utterly disconnected from the suffering happening just a few blocks away. On the other side, you have the narrow, winding streets of neighborhoods like the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where families of 6 or 7 people share a single room, where the smell of waste and rot hangs permanently in the air, and where children with hollow cheeks beg for scraps outside bakeries they cannot afford to enter. The distance between these two worlds is sometimes no more than a 15-minute walk. But in terms of lived experience, they might as well be on different planets. At the center of all this, both geographically and symbolically, sits the Palais Royal. This sprawling complex of gardens, arcades, and shops belongs to the Duke of Orléans, a cousin of King Louis XVI, and it has become the unofficial gathering place for everyone who wants to talk about what is going wrong with France. The police have limited authority here because it is technically private property, which means people can speak more freely than anywhere else in the city. Writers, lawyers, students, and unemployed workers gather under the covered walkways, reading pamphlets aloud, debating the latest news, and dreaming out loud about a different kind of France. Some of them talk about reform, some talk about revolution, and some simply talk about bread. But all of them share the same conviction that something has to change, that the current system cannot hold, that the pressure building inside this city has to find a release before it tears everything apart. And what about the man who is supposed to be leading all of this? King Louis XVI sits in his palace at Versailles, about 12 miles outside the city, surrounded by thousands of courtiers and servants, seemingly unaware of just how desperate things have become. He is not a cruel man. By most accounts, he is shy, awkward, and far more interested in his hobby of making locks than in governing a kingdom. But he is also indecisive at the worst possible moment, surrounded by advisors who cannot agree on anything, and married to a queen, Marie Antoinette, who has become a symbol of everything the common people resent about the monarchy. Whether she actually said, "Let them eat cake," does not really matter anymore. What matters is that people believe she could have said it. What matters is that the royal family has become a target for all the frustration and rage that has been building for years. And as this winter turns to spring, as the hungry months drag on and the debates at the Palais Royal grow louder and more radical, one thing is becoming clear to almost everyone in Paris. That quiet, ordinary life they have known is about to end. They can feel it in their bones. They just do not know yet what will replace it. By the time May arrives, the tension that has been simmering beneath the surface of Paris finally finds a stage. For the first time in 175 years, the king has summoned the Estates General, an ancient assembly representing the three orders of French society, to meet at Versailles and address the kingdom's desperate financial crisis. This is not a gift from a generous monarch. This is a last resort from a government that has run out of options. France is essentially bankrupt, drowning in debt from years of expensive wars, including the one that helped the American colonies win their independence, and the traditional sources of revenue have dried up completely. The nobility and the clergy, who control most of the wealth in the country, refuse to pay taxes. The common people, who already pay far more than they can afford, have nothing left to give. And so Louis XVI, reluctantly and without any real plan, has called together 1,200 deputies from across France to figure out what to do next. On May 5, 1789, they gather in a grand hall at Versailles, dressed according to their rank, the clergy in their robes, the nobles in their silks and feathered hats, and the representatives of the Third Estate, the commoners, in plain black suits. From the very first moment, the inequality is visible for everyone to see. The Third Estate represents roughly 97% of the French population, but under the traditional voting rules, each of the three estates gets exactly one vote. That means the clergy and the nobility, who together represent less than 3% of the people, can always outvote the commoners 2-1. It does not matter how many deputies the Third Estate sends. It does not matter how eloquent their arguments are. As long as this system remains in place, real change is mathematically impossible. And the commoners know it. They have traveled from every corner of France, carrying with them notebooks filled with grievances from their constituents, demands for fairer taxes, for legal equality, for a constitution that would limit the power of the king. They did not come all this way to be silenced by an outdated voting system designed to protect the privileged few. They came to be heard. And when the first weeks of the Estates General produce nothing but procedural arguments and stalling tactics, frustration begins to boil over. The deputies of the Third Estate start meeting on their own, talking late into the night, trying to figure out their next move. They are lawyers, doctors, merchants, and writers, men who have studied the philosophers of the Enlightenment and who believe deeply in the principles of reason and natural rights. and slowly, a radical idea begins to take shape among them. If the other two estates will not join them, they will simply declare themselves the true representatives of the French nation and proceed without permission. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate takes a step that will echo through history. They vote to rename themselves the National Assembly, claiming that they alone have the authority to speak for the people of France. It is an act of breathtaking audacity. They have no army, no police force, no way to enforce their decisions. All they have is a conviction that legitimacy comes from the people, not from the king, and that a government which ignores the will of the majority has no right to govern at all. The king, predictably, is furious. His advisers urge him to shut the whole thing down, to remind these upstart commoners who holds the real power in France. And so, on June 20th, when the deputies of the newly declared National Assembly arrive at their usual meeting hall, they find the doors locked and guarded by royal soldiers. They have been shut out. Their meeting has been cancelled by order of the king. For a moment, it seems like the whole experiment might be over before it truly begins. But instead of giving up, instead of going home in defeat, the deputies do something extraordinary. They walk through the rain to a nearby indoor tennis court, a large, empty building used by the aristocracy for sport, and there, in that unlikely setting, they take an oath that will change everything. The scene inside that tennis court is one of the most dramatic moments in the entire revolution, though no shots are fired and no battles are fought. Nearly 600 men crowd into the space, their black suits damp from the rain, their voices rising as they debate what to do next. And then, one by one, they step forward and swear a solemn oath. They vow never to separate and to reassemble wherever circumstances require, until the constitution of the kingdom is established and fixed upon solid foundations. This is the famous tennis court oath, and it represents a point of no return. These men are no longer petitioning the king for reforms. They are declaring that they will create a new system of government, whether the king approves or not. They are betting their careers, their fortunes, and possibly their lives on the belief that the people of France will support them. And as word of the oath spreads through Paris, as copies of their declaration are printed and distributed in coffee houses and public squares, something shifts in the mood of the city. Hope mixes with excitement. Fear mixes with determination. The people of Paris begin to realize that the impossible might actually be happening. That change, real change, might finally be within reach. But they also sense, even in these heady early days, that the king and his supporters will not simply step aside. The battle for France has only just begun, and the hardest tests are still ahead. The hope that filled Paris after the tennis court oath does not last long. Within days, disturbing rumors begin to spread through the city. Royal troops are gathering outside the capital. Regiments of foreign soldiers, German and Swiss mercenaries loyal only to the king, are marching toward Versailles. And then, on July 11, 1789, the news arrives that confirms everyone's worst fears. Jacques Necker, the popular finance minister who had been seen as the last voice of reason in the royal government, the one man who seemed to understand the suffering of the common people, has been dismissed by the king. Louis has listened to his conservative advisers. He has decided to take a hard line, and to the people of Paris, the message is unmistakably clear. The king is preparing to crush the National Assembly by force. He is going to use his soldiers to silence the voice of the people. Everything they have fought for, everything they have hoped for, is about to be destroyed. The reaction in Paris is immediate and volcanic. Crowds pour into the streets. angry and afraid, searching for weapons, searching for leadership, searching for any way to defend themselves against the army they are certain is coming. July 12th and 13th are days of chaos and preparation. The city seems to have lost all sense of normal order. Shops close their doors. Barricades go up in the narrow streets. At the Palais Royal, orators stand on tables and chairs, calling the people to arms, warning that a massacre is imminent if they do not act. A young lawyer named Camille Desmoulins leaps onto a café table, waves a pistol in the air, and shouts that the only choice left is between liberty and chains. The crowd roars its approval. Green ribbons, the color of hope, appear on hats and coats throughout the city. But hope alone will not stop an army. The people need weapons, real weapons, muskets and cannons and gunpowder. They raid the armories, they break into gunsmiths' shops, they take whatever they can find. By the morning of July 14th, an estimated 30,000 Parisians have armed themselves with muskets taken from the Invalides, the military hospital where old weapons were stored. But they still lack one crucial thing: gunpowder. And everyone knows where the gunpowder is kept. It is locked inside an ancient fortress on the eastern edge of the city, a place that has stood for over 400 years as a symbol of royal authority, a place where kings have sent their enemies to disappear. The Bastille. The Bastille, in 1789, is not the terrifying dungeon of popular imagination. It is a medieval fortress with 8 round towers and walls nearly 80 feet high, but its days as a major prison are mostly over. On July 14th, it holds only 7 prisoners, none of them political. Its garrison consists of about 80 retired soldiers and 30 Swiss guards, hardly a formidable force, but none of that matters to the crowd that gathers outside its gates that morning. To them, the Bastille represents everything they hate about the old regime. It is the place where people could be locked away forever on the king's orders alone, without trial, without appeal, without even knowing the charges against them. It is a monument to arbitrary power, to the idea that some lives matter more than others, to the belief that kings can do whatever they please. And so, when the crowd demands that the fortress surrender its gunpowder, when the governor of the Bastille, a man named Bernard-René Delaunay, hesitates and tries to negotiate, when shots ring out and people begin to fall, the confrontation becomes something far larger than a fight over ammunition. It becomes a battle for the soul of France. The siege lasts only a few hours, but those hours change everything. Cannons are brought from the Invalides and aimed at the fortress gates. The crowd, now numbering in the thousands, presses forward despite the gunfire from the towers. By mid-afternoon, the outer courtyard has been breached. Governor Delaunay, realizing that no reinforcements are coming, that the king has abandoned him, finally agrees to surrender. The drawbridge is lowered, and the crowd pours into the Bastille. What happens next is violent and chaotic. Delaunay is seized by the mob and does not survive the day. His end is brutal, a reminder that revolutions are not clean or orderly, that anger held down for too long can explode in terrible ways. But in the midst of the violence, something else is happening. The prisoners are freed, the cells are thrown open, and word begins to spread through Paris, then through France, then through all of Europe, that the people have taken the Bastille. The symbol of royal oppression has fallen. The impossible has happened. When the news reaches Versailles that night, a courtier wakes the king to tell him what has occurred. "Is it a revolt?" Louis asks, still half asleep. "No, sire," comes the reply. "It is a revolution." In the days that follow, The Bastille is torn apart stone by stone. Entrepreneurs sell pieces of it as souvenirs. The keys to the fortress are sent to George Washington in America, a gift from one revolution to another. And in Paris, something new emerges from the rubble. A citizens' militia called the National Guard, organized to keep order and protect the gains of the revolution, its soldiers wearing a new cockade that combines the blue and red of Paris with the white of the Bourbon monarchy. Red, white, and blue, the colors that will come to symbolize liberty itself. July 14th, 1789, will never be forgotten. It will become the national holiday of France, celebrated every year with parades and fireworks, a reminder that ordinary people, when pushed far enough, can change the course of history. But on that summer evening, as smoke still rises from the fallen fortress, no one in Paris knows what comes next. They have torn down a symbol. Now they must build something in its place. The fall of the Bastille has shaken the foundations of the old order, but the revolution is far from complete. In the weeks that follow, a wave of fear and violence sweeps through the French countryside as peasants rise up against their landlords, burning manor houses and destroying the records of feudal obligations that have kept them in bondage for centuries. This period, known as the Great Fear, sends shockwaves all the way back to Versailles, where the deputies of the National Assembly realize they must act quickly or risk losing control entirely. And so, on the night of August 4th, 1789, in one of the most extraordinary sessions in parliamentary history, the Assembly does something that no one could have predicted. One by one, noble deputies rise to renounce their ancient privileges. Tax exemptions, hunting rights, the power to collect dues from peasants, all of it swept away in a single evening of emotional speeches and dramatic gestures. By the time the sun rises on August 5th, the feudal system that has defined French society for nearly 1,000 years has been officially abolished. It is a moment of genuine idealism, a glimpse of what the revolution might become at its best, though many of the nobles who voted that night will later regret their generosity when they realize exactly what they have given up. 3 weeks later, on August 26th, the National Assembly produces another document that will outlast the revolution itself. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen is just 17 articles long, but its words will echo through the centuries, inspiring movements for freedom and equality around the world. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights, the first article proclaims, a direct challenge to every monarchy, every aristocracy, every system that claims some people are born to rule and others to obey. The Declaration guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to a fair trial. It declares that sovereignty belongs to the nation, not to the king. It establishes, in clear and simple language, the principles that the revolutionaries believe should guide any just government. Thomas Jefferson, the American ambassador to France, has been consulted during its drafting, and the influence of the American Declaration of Independence is unmistakable. But the French version goes further in some ways, more explicitly universal in its claims, more ambitious in its vision of human rights. It is a document designed not just for France, but for humanity. And yet, for all its grand ideals, one very practical problem remains. The king refuses to sign it. Louis XVI has been playing a dangerous game of hesitation and delay, hoping perhaps that the revolutionary fervor will burn itself out, that his moment to reassert control will eventually come. He has reluctantly accepted some of the changes forced upon him, but the Declaration of the Rights of Man sits unsigned on his desk, a symbol of his refusal to fully embrace the new order. Meanwhile, in Paris, the old problems have not gone away. The harvest has been poor again. Bread remains scarce and expensive, and the people who stormed the Bastille are growing restless. They won a great victory in July, but victory has not filled their stomachs. Rumors circulate that the king is stockpiling grain at Versailles while Parisians go hungry. Rumors spread that the Queen, Marie Antoinette, is plotting with foreign powers to crush the revolution. Whether these rumors are true matters less than the fact that people believe them. And on the morning of October 5, 1789, that belief finally explodes into action. It begins in the markets of Paris, where women have gathered since dawn, waiting in line for bread that never seems to arrive. Frustration turns to anger. Anger turns to organization, and soon a crowd of several thousand, mostly women, begins to march. Their destination is Versailles, 12 miles away, where the king and queen live in splendor while their children go hungry. They carry pikes and pitchforks, kitchen knives and clubs. Some pull a cannon behind them. They are housewives and fishmongers, laundresses and seamstresses, and they are done waiting for the men in the assembly to solve their problems. They will speak to the king themselves. They will demand bread, and they will not take no for an answer. The march takes hours, through rain and mud, but the women do not stop. By the time they reach the gates of Versailles in the early evening, their numbers have swelled to perhaps 10,000. They flood into the assembly hall, interrupting the debates, forcing the deputies to listen. A delegation is sent to see the king. Louis, taken by surprise, agrees to sign the declaration and promises to address the bread shortage. But it is not enough. The crowd settles in for the night, surrounding the palace, making it clear that they will not leave until they get what they really came for. They want the king in Paris, where they can watch him, where he cannot plot against them from the safety of his golden cage. What happens in the early hours of October 6th is chaotic and frightening. A group of protesters breaks into the palace, searching for the queen's apartments. Guards are overpowered. Marie Antoinette barely escapes through a secret passage. By the time the National Guard, under the command of the Marquis de Lafayette, manages to restore some order, the situation has become irreversible. The crowd outside is chanting for the royal family to return with them to Paris. Lafayette convinces the king that he has no choice, that resisting will only make things worse. And so, later that morning, a strange and somber procession begins. The royal carriages roll slowly toward Paris, surrounded by the crowd, by women carrying loaves of bread on pikes, by National Guardsmen trying to maintain some dignity in an impossible situation. We are bringing back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy. The crowd chants, a dark joke about who is responsible for feeding the people. By evening, Louis and his family are installed in the Tuileries Palace in the heart of Paris, prisoners in all but name. They will never return to Versailles. The palace that symbolized the glory of the French monarchy will stand empty, its halls silent, its gardens untended, a monument to an age that has ended forever. As the year 1789 draws to a close, Paris is a city transformed beyond recognition. In less than 12 months, the people of France have dismantled a system of government that had endured for centuries. They have stormed a fortress, abolished feudalism, proclaimed the rights of man, and dragged their king from his palace to live among them. The speed of it all is almost impossible to comprehend. In January, Louis XVI was an absolute monarch whose word was law. By December, he is signing decrees written by an assembly he never wanted, living in a palace surrounded by citizens who no longer trust him, watching helplessly as the world he knew crumbles around him. The revolution has won its first great victory. But the story is far from over. The years ahead will bring more upheaval, more conflict, more moments of both triumph and tragedy. Louis and Marie Antoinette will attempt to flee the country and fail. The monarchy will be abolished entirely. The king and queen will face a trial and a fate that shocks all of Europe. A period of intense turmoil known as the Terror will claim thousands of lives as the revolution turns on itself and devours many of its own children. And eventually, out of all this chaos, a young military officer from Corsica named Napoleon Bonaparte will rise to power and reshape not just France, but the entire map of Europe. But all of that lies in the future. What matters now, at the end of this extraordinary year, is what has already been accomplished and what it means for the generations to come. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen will become one of the most influential documents in human history, inspiring constitutions and bills of rights around the world. Its principles, that all people are born free and equal, that governments exist to protect the rights of citizens, that power belongs to the nation and not to kings, will spread far beyond the borders of France, igniting movements for democracy and human dignity on every continent. The American Revolution showed that a colony could break free from an empire. The French Revolution showed something even more radical, that a people could reimagine their entire society from the ground up, that no institution, no matter how ancient or powerful, was beyond challenge. This is the true legacy of 1789. Not the violence or the chaos, but the idea that ordinary people have the right to demand a voice in their own destiny. Today, more than 2 centuries later, the echoes of that revolutionary year are still visible in the streets of Paris. Where the Bastille once stood, there is now a wide open plaza called the Place de la Bastille, marked by a tall column honoring those who fought for liberty. Tourists gather there every day, taking photographs, trying to imagine what it must have felt like to stand before those massive walls and decide that enough was enough. The Tuileries Palace, where Louis and his family spent their final years as royals, was destroyed long ago, but its gardens remain a peaceful green space in the heart of the city where Parisians still come to walk and relax. And every year, on July 14th, France celebrates Bastille Day with parades and fireworks and national pride, remembering the moment when the people rose up and changed the course of history. The revolution did not solve all of France's problems. It did not create a perfect society. It made terrible mistakes and caused immense suffering. But it also proved something that can never be unproven: that change is possible, that the future is not written in stone, that when enough people believe in something strongly enough, they can move mountains and topple fortresses and build a new world from the ruins of the old. If you walk through Paris today, you are walking on ground that witnessed one of the great turning points of human civilization. Every cobblestone, every boulevard, every monument carries within it the memory of 1789. The French still speak of liberty, equality, and fraternity, the 3 words that became the motto of the Revolution and remain the motto of the Republic. And people around the world, whenever they gather to demand their rights, whenever they stand up against injustice, whenever they dare to imagine a better future, are in some way continuing the work that began here, in this city, in that year of hunger and hope and transformation. The revolution that started in Paris did not end in Paris. It spread across oceans and centuries, becoming part of the shared heritage of humanity. And that is perhaps the most remarkable thing about 1789. It was not just a French story. It was, and still is, a story that belongs to all of us,